Pleasure always, to introduce Shweta Madam. She is Professor Anesthesiology and Pain Medicine in KAIM. And she is a wonderful teacher and wonderful friend and very hardcore academician. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you, Kashi, for very kind words. It's always pleasure to interact with you and the pain people. Yeah. So today's topic is about the all about the knee pain, and we have none other than Dr. Meenal Chandra, who is there, who is the consultant at Epion at Hyderabad, and the highest volume of work that they have done it for the knee pain. Uh, I'm not getting to see her CV, but what I know her is a very hardworking, very enthusiastic, and uh, her presentation will speak about her work, the volume of the work that she has done. So we start with the topic. Over to you, Dr. Meenal.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, welcome,
so,
welcome.
so I'll start sharing my PPT. So, ma'am, it is seen now.
Just a minute, let me check. Yes.
Yes, I can see. Yes, yes. Your
Okay.
screen is seen, yeah. And you are audible also, I think. Just try.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible to everyone there?
Yes, yes. You
Yes,
are,
yes, yes.
Nina.
Okay. Okay. So, should I go ahead now, Shweta ma'am?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead. Thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Meenal, and I practice pain. And I have my centers, like my main center is Epion Pain Management in Hyderabad, and then we have 5 more centers across South of India. So, we basically do a lot of regenerative therapy, and knee joint being the most common joint involved as a degenerative condition. We do a lot of knee joint, and knee joint, it sounds as simple. We do a lot of cases, we all see a lot of cases. I'm sure those who are into their courses also, their centers must be doing a lot of knee easy, but still there are a few things which we should be knowing for your practice and for your exam too. So I'll just now it's a big topic, so I'll go through fast. If anything is there, we can stop and discuss. So when I talk about knee pain, practically what I have learned over these many years and treating these many joints is, first thing is we need to understand that why we want to treat knee joint. So like I said that knee joint being the most common cause of chronic pain, knee osteoarthritis being something that around 35 to 40% of the population of below 50 years and more than 70% population after 50 years suffer with knee pain. So it's something that as pain physicians we need to know. It's a very basic, and we are the ones who can do a very good job. So the first thing is why patient come to us for knee joint pain is to relieve of their pain, to improve the functionality, that is to improve the quality of life. So here we are not treating the cause of the pain, or we are not treating the patient on the whole. Our main aim here is to relieve the pain, to improve the function, to improve the quality of life. So many patients will come having disturbed sleep at night. They are unable to do their regular activities. There are so many other things, like a lot of young age teacher will come of 43, 45. So they have another 15, 20 years of their teaching career, and they are in pain. So many marketing people will come. So to improve their quality of life, we have to know, and this is the main reason that we should be knowing that what we are going to do to the patient. Now what I'll be discussing is etiology and clinical evaluation interventions, what we can do, how we measure the efficacy, what are the rehab protocol, lifestyle modifications. So everything in brief I'll be discussing. Now, I'm sure everyone must be knowing about the knee joint. So it's a hinge joint, and we know that it is formed of three bones, femur, tibia, and patella. And something about the joint capsule. We know that posteriorly the joint capsule is there, anteriorly the joint capsule is deficient, and it is replaced by our quadriceps. And then we have our synovial membrane. You see this dark blue line, our synovial membrane, and which continues and form the suprapatellar bursa, which is a continuation of the joint. And then here we have the meniscus, the lateral and the medial meniscus, and we know what is the important role of meniscus. Then we have our ligament, the ACL and the PCL. These ligament which are inside the capsule but outside the synovial membrane. And again, bursas. So we have prepatellar, suprapatellar, infrapatellar bursa, and the passa and serena. And also the Baker cyst and the semimembranous bursa, which I'll be talking about. So why, coming to the etiology, why it is important for us to know, because we can classify the causes of knee pain according to the etiology. So we know when we talk about degenerative condition, it should be osteoarthritis or chondromalacia patella. When we talk about inflammatory conditions, it can be gout, pseudogout, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, or other autoimmune arthritis. Traumatic, we know ligaments and ACL, PCL, MCL, LCL, meniscus, fractures, soft tissue injuries, and also dislocations. Again, in overuse injuries, we have patellofemoral pain syndrome, IT band, tendinitis, bursitis. Infective septic arthritis and tuberculosis, we have to be very, very careful when we talk about, when we deal with Indian population, because tuberculosis is something that, we cannot really ignore. So TB is very, very common. Septic arthritis also does happen in a lot of old age patients without having any comorbidities. People will come with septic arthritis. And sometimes also because of the referred pain, hip pathologies and lumbar spine. Post-COVID, I'm seeing a lot of young patients of avian coming, and they have hip pain radiating to the knee. Sometimes they say that my pain started in the knee. They come to evaluate knee, and then, when you examine and you see that the hip joint movements are restricted and everything, and it comes out to be avian. So it is very, very important to know that what you're treating, what is the etiology of the etiology of the condition, so that it becomes easy for us to understand. Also, a lot of sports player will come to us, and these young players of 13 years, 14 years, those who are into badminton or racket games and all those things, so they will have a typical kind of pain at near the tibial tuberosity. So that could be your shelter lesion, that could be your patellar tendinitis. So all those things we should be knowing. So this is again a diagram showing that, all knee pain is not because of knee osteoarthritis. There can be numerous causes of knee pain, and depending upon which compartment it is, anterior, medial, lateral, and once we are aware of the anatomy, we can very well figure out that what could be the cause, what could be the reason, and then we can correlate it with radiography. Now, when we talk about symptoms, so we need to understand what kind of pain it is. It is acute pain, chronic pain. Does the pain increases with activity and movement? Does the patient have pain at rest? Does the patient have pain at night? And what's the pain score? Is patient able to weight bear or not? The associated symptoms like instability, locking sensation. We need to check for swelling, redness, warmth. Also, a lot of time patients can come to us with swelling in the leg, and pain in the calf is very, very common. If you for patients with knee osteoarthritis, the symptoms will be that, the calf is tender, the calf is painful, and once you start treating, once the knee joint also gets improved, but still the patient will have that the calf pain is not improving. So calf pain, we need to check for tenderness, the medial joint line tenderness, tenderness for meniscus or any other muscle around, crepitus, stiffness, and any other symptoms like weight loss and loss of appetite, because red flag is something which we need to understand and check for it. So was there any trauma? Was there any infection? Signs of infection, any tenderness, sudden onset of swelling, sudden onset of fever, night pain, loss of weight, appetite. And one more very, very important thing, which I have learned, I have learned through a patient actually, is if the patient is unable to wear unable to wear the bait, which is very sudden in onset, do not miss out on the stress fracture. So I have but I have seen typically 3 or 4 cases where the patient have come to me that while doing exercises or just randomly they were doing the regular activities and they heard a click sound, and since then they are not able to bear the weight. And when you examine, when you get an x-ray done, x-ray will not show anything. Even if they get the MRI done, MRI will also not show anything. So a very hard way I learned through one of my patient. I was treating for back and knee, and so she was there with me for like 6-8 months, and suddenly her daughter calls and says that, pain is there. And then pain was so much, she went to a local orthopedician. He saw the x-ray, and then he said that this is osteoarthritis and all those things, and then he prescribed. He missed out on the fracture. Then she came to me, I checked her, I did my scan, and there was a lot of tenderness over pes anserina. And then I told her, okay, I think this is pes anserina. I gave her a hydrodilatation of pes anserina. I put her on good anti-inflammatory, and then she went back. And then again 3-4 days later, daughter told me that pain is not there, but my mom is not able to weight bear. And then again I was like, okay, okay, fine, something I'm missing out. Then she came back to me again, and then I sent her to an orthopedician who is associated with us, and then he did a contrast MRI, and then we realized that this is a stress fracture, and because of which she is not able to bear the weight. So I had this in mind. And then very recently, 3-4 months back, again I got a patient who sudden onset of not able to bear the weight. And I was like, no, you need to get a MRI contrast, and then it showed stress fracture. So stress fracture is something we don't come across very commonly, but if you have any patient, then don't miss out on this. Very important is taking care of the proper history. And whenever I talk, even if knee pain, I know the patient has come with knee osteoarthritis because of the age or the way they are walking, and we know that it's a diagnosed case of knee osteoarthritis. But also it is very, very important to talk to the patient, because when we manage as pain physician, it has to be a holistic approach. So we know that when it started, how it started, is she able to weight bear, does she need support at home, is she able to do her regular activities, does her pain disturbs her sleep at night, is she on painkiller, whether these painkillers are helping her or not, only knee joints are involved or other joints are involved, whether it is unilateral, bilateral, what is her profession, what are her daily activities, and what she is expecting from the pain to come down. Is she expecting that, a young patient very recently, I think 2 weeks back, a 46-year female came to me, and then she is like, she's having pain and she wants to get PRP done and all those things, so that 6 months later she can prepare herself for the next trekking. So what is the expectation of the patient is also very, very important. If a 75-80-year female is coming and they want to do the entire household activities, it is difficult for us to treat in a way. But at that age, if she only wants to be pain free and do her activities on her own, and she's not dependent on anyone else, so that expectations can be fulfilled. So we need to have a proper history to understand the expectation of the patient. So again, clinical evaluation, when we have taken the history, we do inspection, palpation, range of motion is something that we cannot miss, and we all as physicians know. So inspection, where we check, we compare from both the sides, we see for asymmetry, swelling, discoloration, and then we look for any kind of tenderness, warmth, fusion, and range of motion. So the full extension and the full flexion, at what range of flexion does the patient is having pain. And if there is any history of trauma, or if it's a sports player or someone with high activities, we need to check for the ligaments. So we have different tests for different ligament. So these are very, very important. And one more very important thing which I forgot to mention here is the gait. So the moment the patient enters your OP room, you see the gait and you can identify. And very classically, you can identify patients of rheumatoid arthritis. The way they walk is you can make it out that this is not osteoarthritis, but probably a case of rheumatoid arthritis. So check for the gait. It is very, very important. So again, range of motion, the flexion we know is from 0 to 135 to 140 degree, extension is 0 degree, and there is a mild rotation that happens at 20 to 30 degree of flexion. Look for look for crepitus. And I was always told that, whenever you examine one joint, make sure you also examine the joint above and examine the joint below. And that's in my mind. And always, if I get a patient of knee, I will examine the hip and also the ankle. And if I get, and I don't miss out on spine as well. So if I get any patient of knee, make sure that you examine the spine, the hip, the ankle, so that we have a complete picture, and do not fail to compare it from the opposite limb. Opposite side comparison is very, very important. Again, for special cases, we have special tests, like for meniscus, we do McMurray's and then Apley's grinding test. And I'm sure you people must be knowing how to do it. Again, for ACL, if you suspect an ACL injury, the most sensitive test would be Latchman's test. And again, anterior draw test. So we know how to do it, and you should know how to properly perform these tests. Again, when we come to lab and radiological correlation, we know the very basic is the X-ray, where we see the bone fractures or the degenerative condition. Like for osteoarthritis, we can see if there are osteophytes and how much joint space has come down, osteopenia and all those things. The basic information we can gather from the X-ray. CT scan, if we suspect something bigger, any fracture or any other, suppose any bone cancer or something we are suspecting. Ultrasound definitely has a very, very important role now. The Royal College of Radiologists have also recommended that ultrasound should be done for patients with anterior joint pain. Because we know that X-ray has a very limited role, and when it comes to MRI with Indian population, where we cannot tell every patient to get an MRI done, ultrasound is a bedside screening test, and if we all know how to properly scan it, we can come out with lot of findings. Because when we treat the most common cause of knee pain, osteoarthritis, when we treat, we know that it's not a single pain generator. There are so many other things that has to be taken care of. So ultrasound has to be the basic. I think it should now become the very, very basic of treating knee joint. And MRI, if we suspect any ligament injuries, tendon, cartilage, or if we want to do a proper arthrogram, then we can go for MRI. And if we suspect any muscle injury, or like I said, if suspecting a stress fracture, then we have to go for a contrast MRI. Again, if the basic of the blood test, if we suspect autoimmune rheumatoid arthritis or any infective pathology, so ESR, CRP, anti-CCP, RA factors, these are the basic. Depending on the condition, depending on the patient, you need to do this basic blood test. So X-ray, we know the limited role of X-ray. What we can see is how close the bones have come, and if there is any changes in the alignment, and if there is any growth or any extra osteophytes. That is all we can come from here. There is a grading system, but grading system does not implies to us because the grading system is mostly for patients who want to undergo surgery. So the surgeons will see the KL grading and they will do the treatment. But for us, we need to identify the pain generator and we need to treat it properly. And X-ray is not going to suffice now. At this era, X-ray is not going to suffice anything. Again, MRI, when we suspect injuries, like, in this case, ACL injury is there. When we suspect ACL injury or meniscus, then we have to go for MRI, but not done for routine cases. And then comes our ultrasound, and then there are lots of literature where now they say that the ultrasonic abnormalities in knee osteoarthritis, once we identify it in a very early stages, we can give a better results as compared to done blindly or done on the basis of clinical findings. So now when we come to USG assessment, I always divide the compartments into anterior, posterior, medial, lateral. And according to compartment wise, we can identify the superficial structures. Of course, there are few structures which we cannot properly identify on ultrasound, and ACL being one of the most common thing that it is difficult to identify ACL in ultrasound. But still, any patient coming with history of trauma, at least we can find out if there is any effusion or if there is any increase in the vascularity in the Hoffa's pad. So all those things we can see. So look for your suprapatellar effusion, you look for the medial lateral meniscus, the collateral ligament, measure the cartilage, look for if there is any thinning of the hyaline cartilage. We can see if there is a double cartilage sign, we can suspect gout, or if there is any deposits inside the cartilage because of pseudogout. Presence of Baker's cyst, pes anserina bursa, infrapatellar infrapatellar bursitis. We can look for synovial hypertrophy, capsular thickening, osteophytes, and also the muscles. So the holistic assessment of ultrasound is going to give you information about the entire compartments of the knee, and this is going to help us in preparing the protocol. So again, in anterior, causes of anterior knee joint pain could be because of quadriceps tear, patellar tendon tear, because of suprapatellar bursitis, obviously osteoarthritis, another form of arthritis, or it could be just a prepatellar bursitis, or because of overuse, we may get that patellofemoral syndrome or jumper's knee, or maybe a dislocation or fracture of patella. So we need to know what are the structures in the anterior knee joint, and then we can correlate it with the pathology. So when we talk about ultrasound, we have to do both in long axis and short axis. And once the patient is in supine position, we put a roller beneath and we flex the knee so that we can see the structures properly. And then here, this is in long axis. We see this, this is the patella, this is the femur, this is the quadriceps tendon, and this is the SPR. So this is my picture where you see fluid. This is in long axis. Again, in short axis, you see this is your quadriceps, and this is your rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, medialis, and vastus intermedius. This is your femur. So again, you see how the joint has been a little flexed so that we can see the compartments easily. So this is your quadriceps tendon, and you see the SPR. There is no fluid because this is a healthy joint. Okay, so now you see these are my pictures of a patient having fluid in the suprapatellar recess. Okay, we see this fluid in the suprapatellar recess, and also along with that, we also see some synovial hypertrophy. Here also in this picture, we see some synovial hypertrophy is there, and because of which this suprapatellar recess have been converted into two compartments. So if you inject, if you insert your needle, and if your needle tip gets entangled in any of these fibers, it will be difficult for you to aspirate. So you have to make sure that, you know, when you are doing proper ultrasound guided injection, your tip should enter into this fluid compartment so that you aspirate it. And a lot of time, you know, when you actually touch these synovium, it is very, very painful. So when we talk about suprapatellar fluid, the type of fluid also gives a lot of information. Now here you see this in this picture on the right hand side. This is a clear fluid. So this is a patient having clear fluid because of osteoarthritis. But here you see in this image, there is a collection in the suprapatellar recess, and you see what kind of collection it is. It does not look like there is a free flowing fluid, and how the synovium have been, it's binding together. So this is a case of septic arthritis. So this is a patient, 78-year patient who came to me, and seeing the X-ray, he was advised for surgery, but he didn't want to undergo surgery. And you see, just a bedside screening of this patient could give us so much of information. And then I sent him for MRI, and it came out to be septic arthritis, because this is not good. So the character of the fluid is also very, very important, and ultrasound gives us real good information about it. So again, when you put your probe here in this position in the long axis, you see your patella, you see your tibia, and you see the patellar tendon. Okay. Now again, patellar tendon, what it gives information is, if your patellar tendon is straight, that means the ligament is good. If there is a bowing, that means that we need to strengthen it more. And bowing of the patellar tendon will tell us that how healthy your joint is and how good your quadriceps and other muscles are to take care of your joint. Then again, we look for any kind of collection here. So just beneath the patellar tendon, this is deep infrapatellar, and if we get superficial to it, so it is superficial bursitis. This is your Hoffa's pad. There can be for Hoffa's pad entrapment. If there is increase in the vascularity of the Hoffa's pad, that also gives us information about that there can be any kind of ACL injury. So you see, this is the Hoffa's pad, and if you can check for vascularity, if increased vascularity, you do test for ACL, and if you suspect ACL, then you need to evaluate it further with MRI. Then again, cartilage thickness, you can measure in full flexion. We need to measure the cartilage. You can measure the medial condyle, the lateral condyle, and the intertrochanteric measurement. You see a dark hyaline cartilage, hypoechoic hyaline cartilage. So you can measure, you can make out that, if there is any cortical irregularity, if you can see if there is any thinning of the cartilage in and around, and you can also measure the cartilage. And why this is important for us is because we should know, once we start treating the patient with any kind of modality, we should know that what was the baseline from where we are starting. So it is very, very important to have your own starting findings, so that as we progress, we can assess what is the efficacy of the treatment that I'm giving to my patient. Again, this is an image of jumper's knee. You see how the patellar tendon is because of the overuse. So again, this is the patellar tendon which I was talking about, and any collection above it could be a prepatellar bursitis. So you see the collection beneath it, that is the infrapatellar bursitis. For my patient, you see, I have never seen such huge, infrapatellar bursitis, but here in my patient, there was a huge collection. Again, when I was talking about, you see, this is a healthy cartilage. Okay, you see the hyaline cartilage, the black hypoechoic area. There is no cortical irregularity. This is how a normal joint should look like. So here you see there is thinning of the cartilage. We can't see that proper hypoechoic. So we know that this is a case of osteoarthritis, and we know that there could be a lot of cartilage loss. So this gives a lot of insight. Again, coming to medial joint, the most important structures what we see here is the medial meniscus, the medial collateral ligament, and also pes anserina. Also, the medial retanicular and the medial patellofemoral ligaments and all. But for us to identify, majorly it is the meniscus, the collateral ligament, and the pes anserina. So again, the knee in the knee in flexion, and then you hold the probe in the long axis, and then you look for your medial meniscus. This is the posterior part which we can see. We cannot see the anterior part. And this straight ligament above it is the collateral ligament. So this is a normal structure. This a normal V and a straight line above it. Okay. So this collateral ligament should be like this, and your meniscus should be like this. Anything which does not look like this is abnormal. So we put the probe in long axis. You see the straightening of medial collateral ligament. It is straight, and the medial meniscus. Okay. And now I'll show you different meniscus, because we know that medial meniscus is immobile, and in 99% of the cases of knee osteoarthritis, the medial meniscus has to be degenerated, and in a lot of cases will be torn. So you will get different types of meniscus, and if you don't address the meniscal pathology, the result which you are expecting is not going to be up to the mark. So in this case, I have this collection over the medial meniscus, and patient was having severe tenderness, and you see that it is not a clear fluid, and the character of the fluid into this area is not good. So we can suspect any kind of infection. This is a cyst, and cyst, we see clear black fluid, anechoic fluid we can see, and once we aspirate, once we put the needle, we can aspirate it easily. Again, here we see that there is no collection or anything, but this medial collateral ligament is propped out. And when this medial collateral ligament is not straight and propped out, and your margins of meniscus are little on the higher side. This is a degenerative meniscus. Here you see the meniscus root has propped up, and this is a case of a meniscus tear. So we will get different kinds of meniscus, and depending upon the pathology, depending upon what you see there, we can grade the condition and we can further evaluate it. So again, you see the margins are not good. So this is a case of a rheumatoid arthritis for my patient. You see how there are cortical erosions. So this was in the case of rheumatoid arthritis. Again, a lot of time, diabetic patients or obese patients, lot of obese patients will come who will be having cellulitis, which is there. You see the calf, the ankle area is very, very hard. And when you, trace it upward, you will have this. So you see this is a collection here, and this is of another patient who is having a, subcutaneous edema, which may extend up to the knee. So in such cases, if you see any kind of subcutaneous edema extending up to the knee, you have to be very careful once you put the needle, unless and until you rule out any infection, and unless and until you subside these kind of inflammation or infection, it is better not to touch the patient. So you should be knowing that what is normal, what is abnormal, and touching patients, such kind of patients will definitely can lead to trouble. So it is very, very important that we should know this. Again, like I said, pes anserina. So you see that, pes anserina also will have different characteristic. So this is a thick pes anserina. Here you see there is just a thin rim of pes anserina. Here again, there is a big collection. If most of the time when I do radiofrequency ablation, and then for some reason, patient will definitely come back with pes anserina, tendinite, pes anserina, bursitis and tenderness. So we need to address that also. Again, in lateral knee, the most common thing that we need to see is the lateral meniscus, the lateral collateral ligament, and also the IT band. We look for any kind of tear or cyst, though lateral meniscus tear is not so common, but since we are scanning, we need to scan the entire thing. So this is your lateral meniscus, and this is your lateral collateral ligament. In long axis, we see patient's knee is in flexion. So you can see if there is any collection, you can see any kind of cyst if present, and we can identify that. In the posterior knee, we look for hamstrings. We look for our biceps semimembranosus, semitendinosus. Look for bursa. We look for Baker cyst. But one very, very important thing I learned through a patient only is initially, I never used to put the color and see if the blood flow is good in the popliteal vessels or not. But then once I had an patient, where patient was having calf pain and also knee pain, and then treating with the knee pain, and eventually he came with a little swelling of the calf, and then just trying to identify if there was any component of hidden DVT which I missed or something. And then I spoke to my one of my colleague who's a radiologist, and then she told me that you just check if the blood flow is good or not. And then the blood flow was not good, and since then it has now become routine and mandatory. Whenever I do, I have to see that if there is a good flow in the popliteal vessel. So this is something we usually don't do, but if we do it, we're always on the safer side. Again, Baker cyst. Baker cyst is also not that uncommon. We get to see Baker cyst, but again, what we need to see is the character of the fluid, the type of the fluid. So this is a clear fluid of Baker cyst, but you see here a huge Baker cyst which was communicating down. There was a peduncle also which was communicating down, and it was a ruptured Baker's, because of which the patient was also having a lot of swelling into the calf. So even a ruptured Baker cyst can cause you complete swelling of the calf. So you see, this is a complex fluid inside the Baker cyst, and here also another case, which this is also a complex fluid. Here this is clear fluid. So now once we have ultrasound and once we have clinically examined and we have taken the history and we have correlated with the radiology, then when we plan for interventions, we have a lot of interventions that we can do, like steroids, hyaluronic acid, ozone therapy, dextrose. Then we have all modalities of regenerative therapy. Then we have ablative procedures of radio frequency ablation, and then cool RF, and then cryoablations. We can always do, if the patient has come only with any kind of hamstring tear, then we can do trigger point injections, we can do hydrodissection. If Baker cyst is there, we have to aspirate the Baker cyst. If bursitis is there, we can aspirate and hydrodissect the bursa. So a lot of small interventions which can give big relief to the patient. But the only thing is that we need to identify that what is the pain generator. A lot of time, young middle-aged female will come having only pes answer in a bursa, maybe because of excessive strain. And when you do the X-ray, there will be degenerative changes, and then they will be told it is osteoarthritis. But you put probe, you correlate it with your probe and the exact area of pain, and you see it is just a pes. So even a small procedure like this, can relieve patients of something, big. You can prevent something big to happen. Then when we come to the interventions, and we know radiofrequency ablation of genicular nerves, very simple procedure, have to be the basics we need to do, because this is one of the very basic procedure when we talk about treating knee joint pain, exclusively treating pain. So USG guided we can do, fluoroscopy guided we can do. When we do USG guided, we can do it in short axis and in long axis. We know there are 6 genicular nerves. We target 3 nerves: the superomedial, superolateral, infromedial. Also the middle genicular can also be targeted. A lot of people are doing it, but ideally I do 3. I prefer doing 3, and then I also do other hydrodissections, or if aspiration is there, so I do all those things. But a lot of people are also now targeting the medial genicular. Again, like I said, we do it in long axis and short axis. There is a study where we say that, which says that the short axis way is yielding better results, because we are actually along, not on the tip of the nerve, but along parallel to the nerve. And I am basically trained with doing the this long axis. I prefer doing, because maybe technically I find it little easier, but the short axis is a better option. So this is fluoroscopy guided. Fluoroscopy guided I used to do some 5-6 years back, but then after I got myself skilled with ultrasound, I think I have never done in last 5 years this one, fluoroscopy guided, because it's a tedious procedure and it's painful. So here again, we are targeting the 3 nerves, the superomedial, the superolateral, and the infromedial. We need to go at the junction of the condyle and the shaft, hit the bone, hit it, and then bypass. And then in lateral, we should be at the midpoint of the diaphysis. So we need to be, anatomically, we are going and we are trying to do it. We don't see the nerve here. We don't see the vessel here. So it's just the anatomical guidelines. But now I prefer doing it under ultrasound. So ultrasound, patient is comfortable, supine position. You need to flex the knee. Look for the genicular artery at the junction of the condyle and the shaft. And then you can insert, like I said, I prefer long axis. So, using this linear probe, you can just slant your needle, RF needle, and then you can hit the bone here, and you can do your sensory stimulation, motor stimulation, and then you can do the radio frequency. So this is a case of post-TKR patient with pain. And here we use this hybrid technique to get into, the actual, because here it was in the ultrasound, we were unable to make out the vessel and all those things. So we use the hybrid technique, and we have done it. In cases of post-TKR, radio frequency ablation is the only resort where we can give some relief to the patient. So again, looking for the vessel, and then you can place your needle accordingly. So for conventional RF, 2 lesions. So what we used to do is, this was the time when we were not having pool RF. So what we used to do is we used to do 2 lesions. So now this is your artery. I would place my needle here and then do a lesion. And then after the lesion is done, I would redirect my needle here. So I get a bigger lesion size. So that's how we have adapted to our own system of doing like that. So I'm sure everyone must be knowing about the RF machine and the electrode and how the entire circuit gets closed. So we need to have the whole circuit. We should be knowing that what is sensory, what is motor checking, and before you start ablating, make sure that there is no motor stimulation, because in that case we are going to do disaster. Cool RFA again, very popular these days. But I don't practice pool RFA because again it is very, very tedious. And the conventional RF with 2 lesions, what we have adapted is giving us results same as pool RFA, but it is very popular, and then patients are getting good relief with pool RFA as well. Then coming to regenerative therapy, something that we practice a lot. So in regenerative, the basic platelet-rich plasma therapy, the growth factors. Then we have BMAC and mesenchymal cells, and then now we have lots of cell-based therapies like exosomes, peptides, Goldeggs, vesicles, and so many things are coming up. Obviously, we don't have all the license. We don't have much availability to resources to do it. A lot of clinical trials are happening in the Western countries, but in India, we are still limited only to PRP, BMAC, and MSCs. That also MSCs, we as pain physicians, I don't know how adaptable it is only for a pain physician to do it, but yes, there are a lot of people doing MSCs, SVF also. When we talk about PRP, we know that there are multiple characters of PRP that is going to improve the internal environment of the joint. And that is what we want when we talk in terms of osteoarthritic treatment. So we know that it has a growth factor agonist, it is mitogenic, chemotactic, angiogenic, has antimicrobial property, it increases the lubricant, and a lot of paracrine effect that is going to improve the internal environment. And in mostly patients with 60 years, 70 years, when the stem cells have come down and we don't find much quality of stem cell, I think PRP should be a better option while choosing amongst the other modalities of regenerative. So the rule as such, there is no rule for PRP because we know that we have not come up with any guidelines. There is no standard guidelines. Every association comes up with their own guidelines, and there is nothing we can stick to. So that is why I think it is better to have institutional protocol till the time some society, some association, or some large scale studies come up with a good protocol. So for us, there is no OPD procedure. Everything we do it in operation theater under sterile condition. We don't do blind procedure. It has to be fluoroscopy guided or ultrasound guided. We make sure that the dose of PRP that we require is appropriate, which has to be customized. And we know the subject before we start the treatment. We know our subject and we also know our subject patient. So we have to be very, very sure that whom we are treating and we are treating with what. And just centrifuging the blood is not PRP. Now we know that there are lots of, the recent talk is all about optimizing the patient for PRP, optimizing the dose and optimizing the patient. So just taking 10 ml of blood, centrifuging it and injecting into the patient is not PRP. And that is why we are not getting results. So again, there are lots of commercially available kits that are available. We can use a lot of kits, but make sure now because the things are getting stricter, you have to make sure that the kits that you're using is all under approved by CDSCO and DCGI, because there is lots of things that have come up. So make sure that whatever you're using is well licensed by the Indian government and not what the people are coming and telling to us. So generally, when we talk about PRP, the double centrifugation technique is what is preferred in all the literatures which have been published. And then the next thing that comes is having a good count of the PRP that we are going to inject. The recent literature says that having more than 5 billion count is what is the minimum requirement. But again, there are lots of companies that will come and tell you that, we are going to give you 5 billion, 7 billion. There are companies also claiming to 10 billion and 11 billion, which is practically not possible. So do not listen to them. And they would say they will show you in, they do the study and they will show you. But, before you see on your own, send it to your own lab in your hospitals and try to see it before believing anyone. So this is what we started. This was very long back, I think in 2021, that we were doing with Dr. PRP kit, a double centrifugation technique. These RBCs have settled down and these are platelet poor plasma, and only this much was the platelet rich. But this quantity is very, very less for a big joint like knee. So we need to have good amount and we need to have good concentration. So that is how regenerative has also evolved over the years, where initially people used to say whether it will work or not, to now when people are saying that how it will work. So how you're optimizing the patient and how you're injecting and how you're obtaining the PRP is the fundamental. Again, BMAC, a kind of tedious. I don't prefer it for osteoarthritis, but yes, sports people coming with ACL, meniscus, BMAC can be a good option, but not for osteoarthritis, because again, in that age, the quality of stem cell is very, very less. So in that case, it is always better to have PRP. So again, this is SVF, that is stromal vascular fraction, which is extracted from the patient's fat. Tedious procedure. But the literature says that it also have regenerative potential, and the results till now, whatever we have in the regenerative modality, SVF have shown to have superior results. Now, when we do knee joint injection, again, it has to be in operation theater under sterile condition, patient in supine, knee joint inflection, and then using ultrasound or fluoroscopy, whichever you are comfortable, you can use it. So here, when we do fluoroscopy guided, make sure to enter from the medial side, because we want the drug to, like the concentration to be here. And initially, when you're learning, make sure you take a lateral view so that you see where your needle position is. This is a classical mustache sign of the dye spread. And again, this is the dye in lateral. But yes, we also have to take care that, that we don't do a lot of fluoroscopic shots and radiation exposure for small joint. So once you have excelled, once you know I have entered the joint, you can decrease the number of shots. But yes, this is mandatory, the very basic, to know that, where is my needle and what is the depth of my needle. So this is again for ACL. For ACL, we go in between the tuberosity, and then we go a little more deep, and then we see a thick dye spread like this. In our institute, we are also, like I said, in 99% of the cases of knee osteoarthritis, meniscus is something that has always been a major concern. So whenever we inject PRP intraarticularly into the joint, we also make sure to inject at least 1 ml of PRP into this. It is little hard to inject, but we do infiltrate it here. And then we are coming up with our study also, where we have compared the results of injecting only intraarticular PRP with intraarticular PRP and meniscus PRP, and we have seen that the results are superior when we have infiltrated into the meniscus. This is our protocol. We are doing it, but there is no literature about it, but we are about to publish it, and maybe in next 3-4 months it will be out. So when we talk about PRP, regenerative modality for knee joint pain, there are lots of publications, and then there are lots of debate also that how much it is going to help us. A lot of people are against us. A lot of people are supporting it. Like in US, because we do follow what the Western world is doing. So because things are not FDA approved and things move differently in the West countries, the Indian population, the Asian population also do not have much confidence in using this modality, but this is something that can slow down the progression, a non-surgical option, which will delay the patient with the progression of the disease. Lots of study. This is by Dr. Gautam Das sir and his team, which is a multi-centric study where they strongly suggest that there is evidence for the role of PRP. And they have also told us that, the study have also told us that injecting PRP is not limited by grade. Even higher grades can benefit from PRP. So this is a very good study. And again, the ISACOS have come up with their study where they have supported using platelet-rich plasma therapy for grade 1 to grade 3 osteoarthritis, and they have supported it in their protocol as well. This is also a highly read article which you can go through. This gives a lot of insight. Again, another study which shows that there is level 1 multicentric. It was a level 1 randomized multicentric trial which showed that PRP has superior results as compared to hyaluronic acid. But this tells about the short-term result, but there are also other studies which have shown a longer period of results. This is again another study where they suggest for grade 4 also. This is again level 1 studies supporting PRP. So there are multiple studies. This is again this is a Japanese study which suggests that very pure PRP, that is high dose of PRP, can delay arthroplasty in a lot of patients. So this is a Japanese study and very good one. So now where are we lacking? With all the science-backed literature, what we have for PRP in the musculoskeletal condition, if we don't use it for the mankind, it is the failure of medical science, because we have to use this science so that we do not allow patients to suffer, because like I said, 70% of the population above the age of 50 suffer with knee osteoarthritis. So if we have something that can delay the progression, that can take care of the patient in a non-surgical way, this should always be chosen for. There is no global protocol, and so we attempt to make institutional protocol. So again, a lot of article about PRP. So this is again a case of, this is our case where we have measured the medial cartilage before and after. This is after 1 year. So it does not show immediately. This is after 1 year that we have seen that there was hyaline cartilage was a little thicker after 1 year in a patient. Now, when we talk about this, that whether my PRP is working or not, or my any other modality of treatment is working or not, we put the PRP and then we forget, and then we don't follow up. The only follow up we do with the patient is in form of how much your pain score has come down. But that's not a way how we should go. How should we be doing it? So we have the assessment of efficacy of PRP is always in subjective form and also in objective form. So the subjective form is always your scoring system, they tell NRS or any pain score that from 10 it has come down to 6. But we also should have some objective criteria. And so to have those objective criteria, you should always follow a functional scoring system. Now, for whichever joint you want to do, you choose your own scoring system. So we have WOMAC, we have KOOS, and we have other scoring system as well. But in our clinic, we follow WOMAC. So my physiotherapist will be taking WOMAC for every patient before every sitting. And that's how we tell to the patient. And that's how we also come to know ki last time when you came, excuse me, last time when you came, you had pain in these movements. This time when you have come, your pain and these movements have come. So it is good for us and it is good for the patient. So make sure whenever you do, you follow any kind of scoring system which you are comfortable with. And of course, NRS and VAS is always there. And again, for every case, for every sitting, make sure that you have written the US ultrasound finding. So whether there was any kind of fluid, if the fluid has come back again, or if there is any kind of burst, or if there is any kind of collection. So if you have your baseline ultrasound finding, till the time patient is in follow-up with you, you will have the records of how the joint have improved internally and how the structures around the joint supporting the joint have improved. So this is our WOMAC sheet, which my physiotherapist will be doing. So it has 5 questions of pain, 2 questions of stiffness, and 17 questions of physical function. And here they will be marking all the points. And on the basis of these points only, our protocol of physiotherapy, lifestyle modification, everything will work on. So always make sure to have a scoring system with you. Again, you see all the basic things, presence of fluid, meniscus, bursa, everything record so that it is easier. Cartilage thickness, like I said, we measure it in inflection, and we look for any kind of cartilage thinning, any irregular cortical margins, or any kind of hyaline. The smooth hypoechoic layer is there or not, or if there is any deposits of any calcium or other deposits suspecting pseudo gout. So all those things can be taken care of. So this is a study which shows the grading of the cartilage on ultrasound. So grade 0, when there is a sharp interface and we see a homogeneous hyaline cartilage. Then grade 1, where we see that this sharp interface is gone. Again, in grade 2, we see that there is less than 50% of the thinning of the cartilage. When it is more than 50% of the loss of the cartilage, it is grade 2B. And grade 3, when the entire cartilage has been lost and we don't see any homogeneous structure and only the hyperechoic cortex is seen. So the International Cartilage Repair Society, ICRS, also came up with their own grading, where grade 0 is normal, grade 1 where we can see but with a blurred margin, grade 2 when there is less than 50% of the cartilage loss, grade 3 more than 50, and grade 4 when there is no cartilage seen or there is an irregular cartilage bone interface. Now these are the people who opted for PRP and regenerative for their knee pain conditions to get back to sports. So when these world-class players opt for platelet-rich plasma therapy to get back to sports, there is something in this science, but the only thing is we need to know what we are treating, whom we are treating, and how we are treating. Only PRP, only hyaluronic acid or steroid or any kind of other modalities like hydrodissection or ozone is not going to work unless and until we have combined it with a good rehab. So we know that the stability of the joint is governed by the static and the dynamic forces. The static being all the ligaments attached to it, and the dynamic, the muscles that support the meniscocapsular epineuritis, the bony topography, and the joint load. Every patient will have their own protocol, their body weight, their gait, and also the range of motion. So this is our CPM, the continuous motion machine. So we check for every patient that how much improvement is there in their range of motion once they have come to us and at the end of the sessions. So that is how we will keep a record, and that is how we will prepare our protocol. So having a good rehab team with you in your practice for knee joint is of far importance. So this is my rehab center. This is my sports and rehab center. And here, these are all national level athletes coming with ACL injury. A lot of patients will come with Osgood-Schalter disease, young kids. So all these people need a good rehab. And if we fail to give them good rehab, no PRP, nothing is going to work for them. Lifestyle modification has to be the first thing. Never tell PRP immediately till the time your patient is ready to follow all these protocols. Motivate them for weight reduction, give them a diet protocol. Occupational therapy is important. Ask them to avoid strenuous activity. Ask them to perform their regular activities, supplements, pharmacotherapy, and a good counseling. A lot of time when we restrict the patient, they stop doing even the regular activities that will make their muscle even more stiffer. So what we need to tell them is to avoid the strenuous activity, but perform your regular activities and keep your patient with you at least for 6 months, so that you know what kind of lifestyle they are following, how much is the changes that they have brought into their lifestyle, so that your PRP can work. So when we talk about knee, the take-home message would be, if you want to make the diagnosis, the first thing is talk to the patient. Do not look at this MRI or the ultrasound or any other thing. First thing is talk to the patient, and 90% of the time your diagnosis will be done. Choose for holistic approach, non-pharmacological, pharmacological intervention, rehab, lifestyle modification, image-guided intervention. Believe in the subject, what you're practicing, and success lies in counseling the patient about the existing fact. Why we succeed in giving successful result in our center is because we understand what the patient is expecting from us. Unless and until we understand the expectation, we will fail up to their expectation. So like I said, talking to the patient, understanding what they want from us is very, very important. So these are my center across south of India. And this was a thing that came out on March 2025. So once you all finish your IAPM and then go and practice as individual, you people will also have to face all those things. So be aware what's happening outside in the world. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Meenal. That was an elaborative talk on osteoarthritis, right from the etiology to the examination to the possible interventions, all in detail. So that was really very nice, sharing your experience of the patient. I would like to just go through the chat. There are some questions coming in the chat. So one of them wants to know what is the protocol of making PRP at your center.
So see, my center, when if I do knee joint PRP, first thing is I will do a scan, and if the patient is having fluid, if the patient is having Baker cyst, my first thing will be to aspirate everything, give venous wash, and then get the blood investigation done. I will check for CRP, ESR, everything, and then I will call the patient after 20 days or 21 days. If the patient has come to me for immediate pain relief, I will tell them for radiofrequency ablation. If the patient has come to me that they're able to wear the bait, but they want to, get rid of it, then I will prepare the PRP protocol. So first, I'll always make sure that I have cleaned the joint and then PRP. For knee osteoarthritis, definitely 3 PRP, 15 days apart. And we have now since last 2 years we are giving high volume of PRP, so we make sure that we inject 6 to 8 ml of PRP into each joint, and so we use a lot of commercially available kits and image guided.
So when you are seeing the fluid for the first time, when you do your scout scanning, you say you aspirate and you do the saline, but reactive fluid can come up again. So do you inject steroid at that point of time?
No, because we plan unless and until it is a rheumatoid arthritis or any other kind of autoimmune arthritis, we don't use steroid. So we just give venous wash again. It depends upon if we see a lot of synovial hypertrophy and we see thickening and all those things. So we will obviously not want to touch it. But by and large, we don't use steroid. We give a good venous wash and we do the blood test, and then we just go ahead.
Because one of the papers published by Dr. Das also talked about the synovial hypertrophy and effusion, they being the kind of predictors of failure of even doing RFA. In spite of the diagnostic block being positive, the RFA does not give good results because of there is active inflammation and disease going on. The synovial hypertrophy is
Exactly. That is what we have to calm down the joint. So that is why when, if there is a lot of synovial hypertrophy, when you give good NS wash, you put the patient on some kind of anti-inflammatory, and then you follow up after like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the joint is good. So most of the time, I have seen, if it is not, yes, in some cases, like, when patients of synovial chondromatosis and all those things, the fluid will keep on coming. So in those cases, those are exceptional cases. But if it is a normal, healthy joint, even though there is synovial hypertrophy, give them a wash, calm them, calm the joint, give them some time, and then I think then they come back with good joint, and then you can inject PRP.
And what will be the strategy for a gout OA?
For gout OA, again, we need to bring down the uric acid levels to the normal. Again, we treat it like a normal osteoarthritis.
Okay, so for them also you can offer regenerative.
Yeah. But obviously, we need to have that the levels are always within normal.
Yes. Some more question. How do you manage chondromalacia patella?
See, for chondromalacia patella, no, it is very, very difficult to go behind and keep on injecting. But again, in those cases, it is very important that apart from PRP, we also have to work on their biomechanics, because it is because of that the patellofemoral alignment is such that it is overused. So if you don't do lifestyle modification, it is difficult. But again, in chondromalacia patella also, if you see the joint, whatever it is, whatever inflammation is there, wash it out. But only thing is that injecting behind the PRP under ultrasound guided is a little tedious. We try to do it, but apart from that, the other modalities play important role.
Okay. Now another question is that whether fluoroscopy and the ultrasound, which one is preferred? Do they have the same kind of success rate?
See, I prefer, I have always seen the one doing fluoroscopy guided injecting into the joint gives me more satisfaction, and also patient a better satisfaction. But again, if you're doing multiple joints, and then, you don't want to expose yourself and to the patient a lot of time with the fluoroscopy, ultrasound into the recess is also a good option. But for me, I am more satisfied when I do intraarticular into the joint under fluoroscopy.
So
One more thing that will, for newcomers, no, one more thing that is that could be a problem is when there is no fluid in the suprapatellar recess, then it becomes difficult for you to where you put your needle. So in those cases, you can just use little NS, keep on giving and create a recess, and then you can inject. But then in those cases, PRP or steroid is okay. But if you are trying to inject hyaluronic acid, and if you are not into the recess, then that could be a concern. So if you are learning new and you're not very sure of ultrasound, then go for fluoroscopy.
okay, now, so what is the indication? Do you combine it with hyaluronic acid? Do you combine it with regenerative?
Yeah, so we do PRP whenever we call the patient for the first sitting. We try to combine it with hyaluronic acid and PRP, so that hyaluronic acid act as a scaffolding where where your PRP will go and get deposited, and so the growth factors keep on getting released. So there is 2-3 literature which says that hyaluronic acid with PRP are giving better results. So we take that chance.
But what is the sequence then? Do you inject the growth factor?
Hyaluronic acid first and then PRP.
PRP. And what is your rehab protocol in the sense? Do you advise, because the lifespan of the growth factors or whatever PRP is quite short. So do you tell them to do rest for some 48 hours and then go
No.
for?
We don't tell them for rest. We only ask them not to do the strenuous activities. So
Correct.
normal activities, they have to move, they have to do their general activities. And after 3 days, the physiotherapist, what my physiotherapist have told them exercises, they have to start, and their routine will be as it is. Driving, stairs climbing, and other kinds of gymming activity, we do stop, but we don't put them on rest.
Yeah. So it's a low activity that is
Yeah.
advised.
I actually had a patient whom we told that, you're not supposed to do activities, and she went into bed rest for 3-4 days and developed DVT. She was some prone case, and and then so we make sure that we tell them properly that what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
Because after procedure, if there is any kind of swelling and all, they will think, oh, I got a procedure done, no, maybe this is normal, maybe this is normal.
Yeah, she needs to rest more, and that can cause the.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
patience only will teach us so many things.
definitely, definitely. Now, post TKR, we do RFA, yes, but some of them may have, very refractory pain. So, any further modality that you think we can offer them? Some of them who
See,
just on.
I have seen a lot of patients who will have collection. So if the surgeon has ruled out any kind of infection, you can just go and try to aspirate. If you can aspirate the collection and give some kind of triamcinolone for short term, that active inflammatory part can come down, and then you can do RF.
Okay, because
So,
in
but
a replaced joint, you are worried about entering the joint for infection. So, of course, antibiotic cover and all would be
yeah.
required.
So
But
unless and until everything has been taken care of and there has been no foci, then you can do that.
any case where you have offered PRF to DRG, where it's become, so much of central sensitization has come up because of the long-standing refractory pain. So, any case you have seen?
No, ma'am.
Uh, Just this is one of the severe cases that sometimes we see in spite of myofascial component being taken care. And sometimes it is coming also from the knee pain, also primary probably has come from spine, which is not realized. So that if is the cause, then we have to look at the other cause. When if the pain continues, we have to reassess our patient and look for any other cause rather than looking at knee being the problem.
Yeah.
So
That is
always
why examining the hip, ankle, lumbar spine becomes
Yes.
very important.
Yes, yeah. So I think most of the questions have been discussed and answered. Yeah, one question asked is that how many days prior you stop the NSAIDs before giving PRP? So
The
after
NSAIDs, we stop at least 4 to 5 days. They say for 7 days, but we stop for 4 to 5 days.
and do you need to cover up for any other weak opioids or something post PRP as a
And post
routine?
PRP, post PRP, we only manage with ice and dolo.
Okay, that's great.
So invariably we tell our patients, you have pain, you don't have pain, apply ice.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I think we have had a good discussion and a lot of brainstorming amongst the participants. So I'm happy about it. So thank you so much, Meenal, for this wonderful talk and a very detailed experience sharing. So great to have you here. Thank you so
ma'am.
much. Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Meenal.
yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta. That was a
yeah.
wonderful
Hi.
session. It
Hi,
was
ma'am.
great to have you here.
I thought
I
you missed it.
no. I joined little late, just 5 minutes late. You were on your first slide.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so it
Yeah,
was a very great lecture. Shweta,
Thank
thanks
you,
a
ma'am.
lot for your insights, and I hope
yeah,
all of you have benefited with it.
yeah,
So, if Dr. Shweta, if you are okay with it, we
yeah,
can
yeah.
end the session for today.
Yes. I think we have done a good job. So,
Yeah, you've done a great
okay.
job. Yeah.
Bye. Good night, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye, everyone.